potential ideas for recommendations, and I think that was really worthwhile, and a great data presentation from Greg as well. So if you hadn't had a chance to look at that, we'll make sure. Not sure if I saw it being shared just yet, but once it gets shared, if it hasn't already, I encourage everyone to look at the PowerPoint that Greg and his staff at planning was able to put together. So Ed, I'm going to hand it over to you to get us really kicked off.
Absolutely. So, one, thanks everybody for the few of us who were really diligent and already checking out the link that Dia shared. Glad to see everyone was eager in that sense. But this evening we're going to be hearing from a total of 3 different speakers. So what I'm going to ask is that everyone, mute. It looks like most folks are muted, but I'm going to ask that everyone go ahead and mute. I'm going to do an introduction in the order that they'll be speaking. Then what I'm going to do is allow them to have presentation rights. And then, of course, as we get through those, we'll do a Q&A. Had a lot of great discussion throughout the week during the Q&A period. So happy to facilitate that again this evening. So just to start, I want everyone to know we'll be hearing from Task Force member Eddie Latimer. Eddie, CEO of Affordable Housing Resources. Eddie is the founder of Affordable Housing Resources, which is Nashville's oldest nonprofit housing development corporation. With a collection of programs that are dedicated to putting people in homes that do not burden them financially, and doing so with a high level of dignity. They've also been one of Nashville's largest nonprofit housing development corporations that has been constructing and rehabbing homes as well, with nearly 1,500 quality affordable homes and townhomes constructed. So just really admire the work that they've been doing. And during the recession, Affordable Housing Resources was ranked 2nd in the nation by NeighborWorks for saving homeowners from foreclosure and helping hundreds through the current rental assistance program. I think Eddie has served as a pioneer, a persistent practitioner, and a leader for more than 30 years. And I'm thankful for all the work that Eddie's done. Very much grateful for the contributions that he and the Affordable Housing Resources team has provided and will continue to provide. And without a doubt, the situation we're in today would be far more dire without his work. We'll also be hearing from Tom, and Tom, forgive me if I mispronounce your last name, but Tom Amdur, and you can unmute and correct me if that's incorrect. But Tom, thank you for joining us. Tom is the president of the National Housing and Rehab Association, as well as Tennessee's Developers Council. Tom joined NHRA in 2004 and currently serves as its president. NHRA is a national trade association and a peer network for affordable housing developers and related professions. Tom also serves as the president of NHRA's subsidiary councils and chapters, including the California Developers Council. Already mentioned the Tennessee Developers Council, but the National Council of Housing Market Analysts. So I think, Tom, you're going to help us nerd out about this stuff. We found a brethren in that for sure. Tom has served in many other roles of leadership and advocacy in the housing arena. And Tom is a frequent speaker at affordable housing and sustainable development, as well as tax credit industry events. It has been published in a variety of industry journals. So happy to welcome Tom this evening. Thank you for joining us. Last but certainly not least, we'll be hearing from fellow task force member Duane Barrett. Duane is a managing member of Reno and Kavanaugh. Duane he leads the firm's management committee in strategic planning, firm administration, and practice development. Duane has a broad range of transactional experience related to affordable housing, so thank you for lending that experience to us this evening, as well as federal and state tax issues, including low-income housing tax credits, so LIHTC, also community investment tax credits, so CITC, tax-exempt bond financing, tax increment financing, so TIF, the Affordable Housing Program funds, the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG funds, Home Investment Partnership Program and home funds, and other mixed finance transactions. So, when introducing Duane, I feel like I need a glossary of the different acronyms that we often use in affordable housing. But it's good to have someone who's a practitioner in utilization of those tools. And Duane and his firm are very apt at navigating those multitude of financing options. And so happy to get started this afternoon. Eddie, I see you have the ball already, and you'll be kicking us off. So I'll turn it over to you to get us started. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ed and Nick, and thanks. All right, what I want to do is I want to just give a 30,000 foot large picture, because the main thing that we're going to need, in our meeting today, we talked about our next steps, which was helpful to see ahead. So the main thing is just to know resources, and that's what I want to do here. And Duane and Thom will fill in details on some of these sources of funding, and also show about how to blend it and whatnot. So they're going to give you more street knowledge. My goal here is to just give you basic knowledge of what's available, and how we use it. All right. I've enjoyed being on this committee. I mean, every friggin' meeting, I have no idea where it's going, and it always goes the opposite direction. So, but it's been really fun to do. I'm always have questions going on. So anyway, it's good. All right, so the first thing I want to do is the three main challenges. All right, now at a high level, what happens is in all of our discussions, we've started talking about what's affordable. Basically, in our very first meeting, we tried to define affordable. We never did complete the definition. So I wrote up a little 1.5-page paper that Dia sent to everybody today. That's just on how to define affordable, 101. It's just a basic definition. But essentially, those of us who use this money understand that affordable is defined by the source of funds. All right. And the people, it's like he who has the gold rules. And that's sort of the paper. It's worth looking at just to get a sense of it. But pretty much HUD is the main definer of what is affordable. And the low-income housing tax credit program created this group called 60%, which is, you'll see here. But so those are the two that have really done most of the defining, that have guided most of the financing, that has created most of the affordable housing in the Nashville area. All right, so HUD breaks it out. They have great names. I love government. Extremely low income. All right, these are people who are under, can y'all see this?
No, you're gonna need to share, Eddie.
All right, I have to do the share thing. Thank you. All right. All right, so thank you. Hey, Ed, if I don't do that again, yell at me, please.
Yes, sir. We all can see it now, though.
Okay. All right, so they do this thing called extremely low income. And that's people under 30% AMI, which is pretty much the people that MDHA has housed so effectively over so many decades. And this is why it's never been a real challenge for Nashville. But it also includes all your special needs groups, which is everybody getting out of rehab, to people with special needs like developmental disabilities, to now your elderly who are on low income. But it also includes, and Beth from our committee shared this with me, if you're making minimum wage, you're making $15,000 a year. So you really are in this category. So even wage earners, some wage earners are in this. But the main point is, and this is that you really need 100% of the actual cost have to be subsidized. You can have no debt service on the housing for these people. And Judy, the other day, Judy and Beth did a really great presentation about housing the homeless. That's a huge group of this. But that's what happens because they don't have the ability to pay rent. They generally can pay some money, but that generally goes toward their utility. All right, the next group is called very low income, which is people, basically the HUD definition is 50% AMI. I'm through the 60%, the tax credit, because this is where they fit in. This is basically your workforce that are earning under 45 or less, maybe 50 or less, and that are the backbone of our hospitality industry, of our university staffing, state and local government staffing. They're the backbone of really what makes this city work. The whole hotel industry. But the hotel industry, actually, a lot of them fit up here. But this is so they can basically afford debt service on that housing. And this is a very generalization of 50% of the actual cost of development. And I have another diagram after this to go through how to stack finance. And then you've got your low income. And this is those who earn under 80% AMI, average median income. Basically, you can get by with them financing 20% or less through subsidies. And so basically, if you're going to cost $100,000, with $100,000, you can build 1 unit for this population. You can build 2 units with this population. You can build about 5 units for this population. It's just helpful to understand that we start looking at solutions. All right. So okay, I'm going to go to this one. All right. So basically, here's how a stack would work. If it cost in the open market $200,000 to build a single family 1,500 square foot home, it costs the nonprofit the same amount. It costs Habitat almost the same amount. It just costs $200,000. Labor, your materials, your land, everything. But this is just sticks and bricks, no land. So when you get done at a market rate unit, which is your middle of people above 80% AMI, they can afford debt service on $200,000. But people at lower incomes cannot. So this is basically a source of funding using for the 50-60% renter. So you could go to the bank and get a construction loan and later convert it into a permanent loan. The bank gets CRA credit, I'll explain that in a minute, for about $100,000. All right, then you can go get a federal grant, like something, the MDHA manages the federal money. So maybe through MDHA or HUD or somewhere like that, you could get a $50,000. You could get a locals grant for maybe $25,000 for the unit. That would be like Barnes money. Something like that, maybe new money that we create through this. Local private funding, the foundations hardly ever chip in, but banks do a little bit more, but they don't. But anyway, so that's what this comes from. We have a lot of money that we have recycled, grants over the years that we've recycled. So that's where this would come from for us. So basically your cost is still $200,000, but your debt service is $100,000. That's the premise behind the low-income housing tax credit, behind home, everything is you've got to get the debt service down so that it can serve, so the debt service or the rent would not exceed 30% of the person's income that lives in the unit. Affordability is not defined by the cost of the unit, but by the income of the resident. And that's something that's in that paper if you want to look at that. All right, any questions so far? Okay. All right, so here this is the 3-page paper. So yeah, so what you got is you've got there's your cost of funding handout. This is your income breakdowns. And remember, each one of these, less subsidy, medium subsidy, high subsidies. Subsidies being grants. So what I did is, where do the subsidies come from? And this is the last thing I want to show you, is the various sources of subsidy funding. And I've had a couple of people go over this, and I thought I had this nailed down. And then I saw Tom's handout, and I realized, oh my God, I missed a lot of things. But this is a really big picture thing on what we use here in town. So HUD is a grandfather created by FDR, as we all are aware of. They've had some great successes and some great failures, but they continue to be our primary thing. They also oversee home and CDBG funding. Now, all HUD funding, which includes home and CDBG, which is used in construction, in housing development, is managed by MDHA. They are a participating jurisdiction, so it all goes through them. So if you want HUD money, you go through MDHA. HUD also oversees FHA, which is a mortgage program, and that money is put on the street through FHA-approved mortgage lenders. Fannie and Freddie Mac, they're also low-income lenders. They're the same thing. Then you've got the Federal Home Loan Bank. Now, this is the first grant I'm throwing out here beside home and CDBG. They have created a program where they can work a local bank would partner with a nonprofit, and they can win a grant through the Federal Home Loan Bank cycle, which is going on right now, the grant cycle, to put money into low-income housing. And their definition is 60%. This is 80, 80, 80, and 80. All of these are the least subsidy groups. Then here's another, these things are not in order necessarily. Housing trust funds. These are relatively new animals. The Barnes Fund is Nashville's housing trust fund. It has put a lot of money on the street. It has built a lot of units, but it has not been funded successfully. Really, to make the Barnes Fund successful, we've got to find a dedicated funding source. It averages $5 to $10 million a year. Tennessee has its, through THDA, also has its housing trust fund, and they serve people at 80%. But at the national level, we have a housing trust fund as well. Y'all may remember this. Barney Frank probably spent his entire career trying to get this thing passed, and he finally got it passed before he left office. And that's also put out through THDA, but its focus is 30% AMI. So with the same funding source, you may have different sources of fund, but the source of funds defines what affordable is in that case. Who's your target market? What is the income of the resident? Also, THDA also has a mortgage. Their mortgages, they use FHA as their guideline, but you can go to THDA for mortgages too. All right, the Community Land Trust, Marshall did a really good job on this a week ago. The land bank is like a land trust, except you can buy the lots or the land out of the bank, or they can give it to you. Whereas the Community Land Trust is more of a overall partnership situation. But we don't have a land bank. We have a land trust. All right, then you got the low-income housing tax credit. I think Duane's going to get into this, but he really knows this thing inside and out. So does Jeremy. But the thing about the low-income housing tax credit is in the last 30 years, this program that was created by Reagan and made permanent by Clinton has created more low-income housing than any federal program, housing units. That's all I'm going to say on that. The Community Development Financial Institution is run by U.S. Treasury, and it's where nonprofits and some government and a few banks can become a lending institution in low-income areas. You have 3 in Nashville: Affordable Housing Resources, Pathway Lending, and the Housing Fund. The thing to know, this was created by Clinton because the banks back in his era were abandoning the poor. And the banks were pulling out of rural environments, and they were pulling out of your rough urban environments. I mean, that's when all the branches disappeared in certain neighborhoods in Nashville. The CITC, one year they did not fund the CITC. Bredesen got his director of revenue, Reagan Farr, to create a substitute. We're the only state in the union that has that, but essentially banks invest into it, and if if they put the money into the housing at 4 under prime, they wind up, if they put in $1 million, they're going to get a tax credit overall of $750,000. Quick disincentive. CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, was the federal government's response to redlining. This is really, all the banks in Nashville are very good partners with CRA. This has been made the bank money accessible, and they have been great to work with. Then you got tax increment financing. I'm not going into all this. New markets tax credit and payment in lieu of taxes. We had a couple of weeks ago, Joe Kane did that, went over that. Remember that? Well, look, I want y'all to look at this though. This is really interesting. Taxes, tax breaks, a tax break, tax breaks, tax breaks, tax breaks. So what the government has figured out, what local people have figured out, one thing we may want to look at is how can we incentivize subsidy through giving people with money tax breaks, or however we get it. In-kind is probably the greatest source of subsidy in the history of housing. Habitat lives off of it, but it's always been used by a lot of people. It's sweat equity. It's the volunteers that do the labor. It's free land. It's free construction materials are greatly reduced prices, et cetera. You cannot be undervalued. And then there are national and regional nonprofits like Enterprise, LISP, NeighborWorks America, who also put money in there. We have two in our region called FAHI and HOPE. And that's pretty much all I wanted to do. But again, this is a high altitude thing, just to kind of give you a 101 view of how subsidy works and where we get them.
Well, Eddie, thank you for that. And I know we're going to transition to Tom after, so I'd appreciate if someone would shift the ball over to Tom so he could navigate. But Eddie, I think you did a fantastic job of showing the immense amount of resources that are used but also needed to be tied together, and oftentimes, form a pretty complex deal structure. And I know, Tom, just from getting a little peek at what you put together, I won't steal any of your thunder, but going into some of those examples at a national scale, I think it's going to be great for our committee to see here. So, Tom, Eddie, I think the ball's still with you, so you might have to share it, or we might have to ask.
I thought I passed it on.
Yeah.
I think I closed it
Can you
out.
pass the ball to Tom Amder?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks so much.
Well, so while I'm waiting to get the screen share, I sit in the Washington, D.C. area, but I feel like I'm a honorable Nashvilleian. I married into Nashville. My wife grew up in Edgewood, and her siblings went to UMFOG, and I have a strong personal connection with your city. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I think, as Eddie already mentioned, the definitions are really important. He talked about the different kinds of affordable. I'm going to talk a little bit about mixed income, which I think is my assignment today. And mixed income can mean different things to different people as well. Is it a mix of incomes within the affordable spectrum? Is it affordable and market rate? Is it affordable and market rate and workforce housing, or is it something else? So I think to start the discussion, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what it means. But I have a slide here that's just about our organization. I'll skip through that. The first thing I wanted to really talk about is just really reiterate the points that Eddie made. You can't produce affordable housing of any type without some sort of subsidy, at least not today, maybe once upon a time. So really our conversation are what are the levers the city of Nashville can bring to the table to produce more affordable housing in a mixed income context. So I highlighted on my slide here, these are all the different types of things for the most part that Eddie already mentioned. But these are things that the city has some jurisdiction over and are the things that you could put to use in developing a mixed income and affordable housing plan. So just highlighting those, grants like your Barnes funds, and hopefully structured as soft loans so you can pair them better with the tax credits. Vouchers from MDHA, property tax abatements are really important to the extent that you can contribute land in some way, shape, or form, whether through a land trust, a land lease, or just donating it. That makes a big difference, or even making improvements on the land through waiver of impact fees or making infrastructure improvements. And then playing around with density to unlock value is also a really important strategy. The first question I think the task force needs to answer, and maybe you've already done this, obviously I'm coming to the conversation late, is who are you trying to serve though by the strategy? There are a lot of different approaches to mixed income housing, and which approach or which targeted population you want to serve will probably dictate in some way, shape, or form the type of sources that you're going to need. So depending on how deep income targeted you want to get, if you're wanting to serve workforce clientele versus extremely low income, you may need to bring vouchers or public housing resources to the fray. If your goal is to serve people that are working in the city of Nashville, you may want to have some sort of covenants on the property that restrict who it can be leased to. This is a really common strategy that we see in resort towns. So if you go out to Colorado, say, a lot of the ski towns have affordable housing programs where you have to be employed in the county for a certain number of days a year to qualify. Obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a really important topic over the last 12 months, and there are specific strategies you might want to pursue not so much in the financing, but perhaps in the marketing of properties. We see a lot of moderate income and mixed income live work type of properties as well. They could be artist housing, but it could also be, sort of incubator spaces that have a housing and a work component. Obviously, if you want to serve special needs populations, another set of resources that may be necessary there are typically vouchers. There are a lot of people that are not served by affordable housing programs at all. That sort of missing middle has become a really popular term in the affordable housing space. And obviously, there's a different set of strategies that you want to implement to reach those folks, since the traditional affordable housing programs like the low-income housing tax credit and the HUD programs that Eddie mentioned already are not used to serve those income populations. Same thing with students who are ineligible for the tax credit in most situations, and seasonal workers that maybe aren't signing like a 6-month lease, which is a minimum for the tax credit program. That maybe isn't such a big issue in Nashville, but I don't know. I thought I'd include it just in case. You'd have different design considerations based on whether it's a family property or an elderly property. And I only point this out in that if you're trying to serve families in the mixed income context, you're going to need bigger units. You may need more subsidy as a result. And obviously, there's opportunity to mix rental and home ownership based on your goals as well. So hopefully, the task force is thinking about all of those populations, and as you kind of settle on the direction you want to go, it'll probably point you towards one strategy or another. But what I've really seen, oops, it seems to be frozen. You guys, let's see here. Here we go. What I've seen really are a few strategies in particular that are most commonly used. So the first one is inclusionary zoning, and I believe that that's been a bit of a problematic approach in Nashville. I know a couple of years ago, the legislature overturned an inclusionary zoning ordinance in the city, and I don't know if that has been fixed since then, but essentially how this works is you mandate the private sector to set aside a certain number of affordable units in a conventional development, and it's restricted to anything over 10 units or 20 or 50 or whatever the case may be. Oftentimes it's paired with local incentives like density bonuses, so where you can develop more units than the current zoning would allow if you have a certain proportion that's affordable or tied to property tax relief. But that's pretty common. You see it in literally hundreds of cities around the country. Where I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, is actually the first inclusionary zoning ordinance, and we've got a lot of affordable housing that has been developed under that regime over the last 30 years. It is relatively inexpensive from a subsidy perspective, which I think is appealing to cities that are managing tight budgets. But the downside of this strategy is it doesn't really contribute all that much affordable housing in the grand scheme of things. Typically, you're seeing 5, 10, maybe 20% set asides for affordable. It typically doesn't serve very deeply income targeted populations as well. You often see them in that 80% AMI, sometimes even 120% AMI. Oftentimes underserved populations, but not necessarily getting new deeply targeted units into the market. Enforcement and compliance has been a problem in a lot of jurisdictions too, where you have the requirement, but after it's there's no inspections or really anything to make sure that the owners are actually complying with it. And a lot of economists say that it actually slows down development overall by shifting the more cost burden to the private sector without incentive. And as a result, it hurts affordable housing generally because it reduces the overall amount of construction. The probably next most common strategy that we see is the 80-20 program. And it's not even really a program, to be perfectly honest. It's a minimum set aside within the low-income housing tax credit. But essentially what this is if you meet the requirements in the qualified allocation plan, so that's the the document that THDA updates every year or every other year that administers the low-income housing tax credit. If you meet the 20 at 50 test, so 20% of the units are 50% of AMI, you can qualify for tax credits and you can qualify for tax-exempt bonds. You have to meet their other requirements as well. But it brings in some portion of tax credits on the affordable units where there's an interest rate advantage, which is not necessarily the case today, but maybe will be again in the future. Developers may be attracted to that financing source. You really cross-subsidize the affordable units with market rate units, which is nice. And again, you often see it paired with other, local incentives to make the deals work. We tend to see it in high-cost cities where the rents are also high. So, say New York, your coastal cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, where you might have rents for a one-bedroom that are $4,000 or $5,000 a unit. That's creates that cross-subsidy. The problems with it are that it uses a lot of private activity bond cap, which is your other major affordable housing production program for non-mixed income deals in Nashville. I know Hunter's on the call here as one of your most prominent developers in that space. And it's problematic if you're using a lot of that public resource and not necessarily getting a lot of affordable housing units when there's lots of developers like Elmington and others that would love to do 100% affordable projects. Sorry, Hunter, if I'm putting words in your mouth. So it's a strategy to consider. It's got some of its cons. Now, the good news there is the tax-exempt bond lawyer community, folks like Duane, have gotten really creative on structuring these mixed income projects to minimize and bifurcate them so that they're not using as much cap. And actually, Fannie Mae has this, you can see a bullet point at the bottom of my slide, but they have a really great tax-exempt loan program that pairs with a taxable program that really allows you to do this in an efficient way. So it's becoming the sort of financing strategy of choice on bifurcated mixed income bond deals. And perhaps Duane can speak more to that later. But I've got a couple of pictures of some 80-20 deals just to show that they're actually out there. These are, I think, both projects from Related Development out in California. I wanted to talk a little bit about the HUD mixed finance public housing strategy as well. And I'm not sure that this is necessarily a strategy that can be replicated easily in Nashville on its face, although I have a slide here that can, a few slides away, that can show you how you can achieve this synthetically. But I think the most impactful mixed income affordable housing deals that have been done around the country have been done through the Hope 6 and Choice Neighborhoods Initiatives program, which were these major federal grants, we're talking $30–40 million grants to revitalize severely distressed public housing. I know MDHA has gotten some Hope 6 dollars over the years, as has Memphis and Knoxville and perhaps a couple of other communities in Tennessee. And it really creates new neighborhoods that are lower density, mixed income. They tend to be mixed use. They tend to have a mix of for sale and home ownership. They're serviced enriched, and they really are impactful on the neighborhoods themselves and the residents that live there. It's a really fantastic program. The problem is that there's not a lot of funding for it. In the Clinton days, Congress was funding $800–900 million a year towards these programs. Now it's more like 200. And it's so that translates to 4 or 5 deals that get done annually, and it's just hard to imagine that Tennessee, which has gotten a lot of these big grants in the past, including some of the most recent ones over in Memphis, it's hard to imagine that with all the competition there, that you can hang your hat on guaranteeing getting a grant like this, which is really too bad because they're really impactful. They also take a long time. They tend to be done in 6 or 7 phases. They require a lot of 9% tax credit allocations. and they tend to require a lot of other funding too. So, but again, they work really well when they do, and they have fantastic success. And we got just a couple pictures again. This is a recent Choice Neighborhoods deal in Fort Worth, Texas. This is right outside the French Quarter in New Orleans, the historic Iberville projects, which were destroyed in Hurricane Katrina, but just a really fantastic revitalization. The message that I really wanted to get to was this slide, which is you can have these kind of outcomes if you want to. It just requires committing the subsidy to get there. And we are seeing increasingly a lot of developers around the country and a lot of communities around the country trying to replicate the success of the Choice Neighborhoods program, which is really beautiful interdisciplinary community revitalization program without those federal grants. So it takes marshaling all of these different types of resources. So using the rental assistance demonstration to turn public housing into Section 8. You could in Nashville create new public housing, believe it or not. You've got care cloth units, which is essentially housing that was taken offline in the past, but could be rebuilt and generate new subsidy to serve that I think the extremely low income, as Eddie was pointing out. You could obviously do things around land. You could do things around tax increment financing. You've got this great opportunity, hopefully with Amazon making a big commitment through their philanthropic efforts to perhaps support an initiative like this, and then using all your typical housing resources as well. What we haven't seen a whole lot of yet, but is increasingly becoming sort of the newest way of approaching affordable housing and mixed income housing is developments in the social impact space, the ESG space. So that's one to watch out for. And these are investors, and they could come from all parts of the economy that want to see outcomes beyond just economic outcomes in their investment dollars. So a big part of what Amazon is trying to do in your city is not just develop affordable housing, but to serve the diverse needs of the community and the development community through their through their investments. You're going to see more and more of this, I think, over time, and hopefully, whether it's some of the healthcare companies that are active in your city, or other major corporations that see the need for affordable housing, they may be able to support, if not the actual construction, then maybe some of the services that go along with it. There aren't actually a whole lot of defined mixed income housing programs at a local level, but there are 3 that have been particularly successful. So they kind of are all the same in one way, shape, or form, but I wanted to just highlight them. So New York City has this mix and match program, which is essentially the 80-20 program I talked about, but it's got a significant slug of additional subsidies as well. It is, there's no market rate that's part of this, but it goes up to 120% of AMI. But they're essentially tacking on their financing, because they're a bond issuer and lender, and then $100,000 per unit in subordinate loans. And that's what it takes to get mixed income deals done in New York, just because of the high cost of land and high cost of development. Massachusetts has a very similar program that's had a lot of success. And it basically works the same way, although you can have a market rate component to it that New York doesn't have. But we're seeing dozens of deals being funded through their mixed income program. And again, it's using their bond window and then attaching a large amount of subsidy to the unit. And then California recently adopted its own similar program as well. Again, I don't want to repeat myself. It's basically the same program as in New York and Massachusetts, with a couple of its twists. It's paired with a state tax credit and some additional subsidy that comes in the form of a subordinate loan. These are all, New York City, is a city, obviously, in the California and Massachusetts are statewide programs, but these are things that could be replicated if there was a will on a local level as well. It really just comes down to having the right amount of dollars and the right financing facility. I just wanted to close with a couple of other thoughts, though, as you're thinking about the next steps. So the financing is only one part of a successful mixed income project. You have to think a lot about how the rent is going to be set, how you're going to market and operate the properties, because if you want to attract those conventional market rate renters, you're going to have market rate amenities and market rate services, and there may be a discount to the market rents that you can charge because of the affordable component. So you can't go in with you can't necessarily go in with a really optimistic rent underwriting. Likewise, you have to operate it at the highest level to have those market rate renters. Not that you wouldn't want to do the same on affordable as well, but that may mean a series of amenities that would not be typical and affordable. That may be, dog walking or dog washing stations and, cinemas and things like that wouldn't be part of a normal subsidized project, again, because you want to attract those market rate renters. And there's a good reason to have the market rate renters, the higher income folks there. The outcomes for the lower income people that live there are much better in terms of educational attainment and a lot of other things. There's a lot of academic work that shows that it really benefits the whole community by having mixed income housing, as opposed to having it be separate and market rate next door to affordable. You got to pick the right site, which is not always easy. There are a lot of concerns in any neighborhood redevelopment, if that's the direction you're going to go, if you're going to go at scale to addressing gentrification and displacement. So those are things to watch out for. Placemaking, which is a really important component of those Hope 6 and Choice Neighborhoods projects that I talked about. That takes some time to do it right, but I would strongly recommend that the city take that approach as it goes forward, because you want to have a long-term impact on the on the entire neighborhood, not just fund some projects if you're going to spend the time and the money, and that's what really makes them impactful. And I probably should point out also, all these strategies hinge on tax credits, and I don't believe that the bond program description actually allows for mixed income housing right now. So you're going to need to have some conversations with Jeremy and the other folks at THDA if you really want to pursue a mixed income strategy using bonds. Or, of course, there are these structured approaches where you condo out the affordable from the market rate. That adds cost, but may be what's required in order to achieve it from a regulatory perspective. So I hope I didn't go over my time, but those are some things to think about, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions and continue the conversation at the right point.
No, you're fine on time. Marshall, I see you have a hand up. If that's purposeful. I also see one from Kay. I'll ask that you ask them quickly, because we do still want to make sure we have time to get to Duane. So Marshall, I see your hand, and then Kay.
Great, thanks, Ed. Just a really quick question about opportunity zones and social impact investing. Does any of that relate or have a correlation on some of the funding sources that you seem to correlate to some of the projects, or how you've been approaching this?
So opportunity zones are relatively new incentive, and they don't play well with the low-income housing tax credit. So you can certainly develop moderate income and conventional housing in an opportunity zone and leverage that incentive, but it really doesn't work with the low income. So you could get affordable in a opportunity zone project, say by putting vouchers in it, but it's not a strategy that we've seen at scale. In terms of the social impact investing, yes, I think that can be a bigger part of the strategy. I didn't include it in my slides, but there's a private equity fund up in Massachusetts. It's a state and local syndicator, but they raised a private equity fund essentially to develop healthy housing in various zip codes around Massachusetts that have poor health outcomes. And a lot of what has been developed has been mixed income housing without the low income housing tax credit. I would have talked about that more, except that it's, Tennessee's not in their footprint, so you need to find somebody else to do it. But I would hope that there would be more of those types of funds and programs that get developed as the ESG space develops further. But it's I'm not seeing a ton of it right now.
Thanks for answering that, Tom. Kay, would you go ahead, please?
Yes. Tom, could you speak a little bit to the income mix on 80-20 programs and what you've seen where you're trying to provide at least a small percentage of units at the extremely low income and then maybe a little higher and then maybe market rate? Have you seen like 3 layers of that approach?
Yes. So in particular, the New York City examples, you see that a fair amount. It tends to be one of 2 ways. So the equivalent of MDHA in New York, NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, is redeveloping some of their excess land and putting public housing, porting the units over from existing public housing that's going to get torn down and redeveloped, and porting public housing, which you can do through the regulatory process, is cumbersome, but Duane's colleagues do it all the time, I think, to do the extremely low income, and then a tax credit component, which kind of is that middle income combined with income averaging. If you can, you could even get to 80, and then having a component above that. In New York, they don't allow market rate units in their mixed income program, but they pay for them through subsidy. It's, as I said, they get $100,000 a door in subsidy to get them there. But yeah, I think that the way to do that is to mix and match subsidies. And to get to that extremely low income, you either need project-based vouchers, you need a project-based rental assistance contract that you could perhaps move over to the property, you need local rental assistance, or you need public housing that you could turn into vouchers through the RAD program. But that's the way to get at that income mix.
Thank you.
All right, John, I see your hand, and then after John, we'll turn it over to Duane so he can conduct his portion. Go ahead, John.
I appreciate so much the presentation, and the word subsidy came up a lot. Do you have data on what cities of our size and scale are investing in affordable housing subsidies? I mean, what if we were trying to get to the right church, maybe not the right pew, what are these folks investing in these programs holistically, to attack their housing problem?
I could get you some data. I would say anecdotally, the Barnes Fund, which is really your local source, is pretty small compared to a lot of other cities. Like if you look at say Denver, which is similar size, similar profile in a lot of ways, they have a lot more resources to play with. And part of the problem, I think, for Tennessee, and I don't know how you solve this, but the tax structure in the state makes it hard to work state tax credits as well. So, a lot of places that have real affordable housing problems with cities that have a similar profile to Nashville, where they're growing and there is greater disparity, they have access to other subsidies outside of the city, and the most effective ones are state credits, and that's the CITC is a nice resource, and I wish there was more of that, but it's a challenging. It's not the most efficient way of delivering subsidy. You're lucky to have it because it's better than not having it, but it's a a cleaner state credit like Georgia has or Colorado has or many other states would, I think, drive a lot more subsidy. But I just don't see how you do that in Tennessee with, with the state's tax structure.
And we're not going to give up on them yet, but thank you.
So one, Tom, again, thank you for the presentation and the questions. And if you would, Tom, pass the ball to Duane, or can you pass the ball to Duane? And if everyone would again mute as we get prepared for Duane's portion of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to pass the ball, but if somebody can take it from me, it would be.
I think Kenya's going to handle that for us. Thanks, Tom.
I don't have a canned presentation at all. I'm going to talk 5 or 10 minutes about just some things that have worked in some other cities, some success stories here locally, but otherwise everything that Eddie mentioned and that Tom had covered, it's the same thing. We just have to figure out how to do it locally, and if we can enhance some of our existing programs, then we can give ourselves a shot at doing some meaningful development. But mixed income housing is really about finding some sort of models or strategies that work. An example would be what Baltimore did. They had no idea what to do with all of their public housing and their and so they just asked the developer community about it. They threw out an RFP out on the street, and they got a lot of interest from local developers who looked at specific projects and said, oh, well, I could do this with that particular project, or here's something innovative. And then they wound up getting a lot of intriguing ideas, and it worked. They brought in different developers who helped rehabilitate those units, and it was what they considered to be a success story. But each of those developers brought the same sort of ideas with them, which is I got to have it for free, otherwise paying for it, I can't afford to do all the meaningful rehab. I'm going to need a break on the expenses, so the property taxes need to remain low or nil. Same with the infrastructure, things like that. Maryland, they changed their law. I believe Tom was aware that they did it where you can't tax the tax credits. The state of Tennessee has been taxing the largest or the most successful program for developing affordable rental housing in the country, and they have been taxing that on top of the NOI, and that has resulted in fewer units throughout the state, particularly in Nashville, which Nashville until 5 years ago didn't really have a tool in the toolbox to address taxing both the tax credits and the NOI with their units. But now they have a pilot program, and I think as MDHA mentioned a week or so ago, their pilot program has been very successful in helping to develop a number of units. So that's another tool that has been successful. Miami waived their impact fees. That again, it's just an example of what you can do to lower the cost of the development. I've got a client Tom mentioned earlier at Hunter Nelson and Elmington, who've done a number of deals in Austin, Texas. I think he has shared the Austin blueprint, and if you'll see in there, they've got a number of strategies to eliminate property taxes, to eliminate expenses of construction that make developments feasible. And Austin, Texas figured out that if they lay out attractive programs, developers will come in and not only share some of their fees and some of the benefits from the development during, you know, they all require tax credits to work, but they will give the units to the city and to the housing authorities to control after the end of the development period, or 17 years. And so they're creating their own revenue streams, both in the short term with getting some fees, and in the long term where they're going to have units under their control that they can put back out on the street or continue to use themselves. In Nashville, there's been a number of them, and again, we don't need an infomercial for Hunter and Elmington, but they did a terrific project over 12th and Wedgwood, but it was a collaboration with the city, where the city said, "We have the land, we will work with you. We're not generating any revenue off the land now, but if you'll give us, you know, a set number of units at different income tiers, then, you know, we won't charge you the significant property taxes that are charged." And it worked. It was a great collaboration that resulted in the use of low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, a pilot, you know, land that wasn't exorbitantly expensive, and they have a development that not only is affordable for, I can't remember the exact number of units, it may be 90 to 110 that are affordable, but it also includes the missing middle that Tom referred to. They've got a significant percentage of units to cover people between 80 and 120% of AMI. And that's very difficult to do in Nashville just because of the various taxing structures and the programs that are available. And I'm looking at Eddie's list of the various sources of subsidy. Woodbine Community Organization has been very successful in working with the Barnes Fund and working to develop using tax credits, pilots in Nashville, and helping to develop a significant number of units. And they require and have used the pilot program that has been mentioned, CITC, which you know, the CITC program has helped significantly to plug some gaps. It may be a challenge, but you know, there are interests that are aligned between for-profit and nonprofit developers who can take advantage of it and work collaboratively for the benefit of developing the units. And again, all of these require low-income housing tax credits, and they use the Barnes Fund. Another subsidy that has been used significantly is that housing choice vouchers through MDHA. And Tom, to your point earlier, MDHA, I think, was one of the first agencies to go through the front door in converting Faircloth units to RAD. We worked with them on that, and it was incredibly painful, but they were able to, you know, help, you know, walk HUD through it, and it has helped them develop a number of recent projects that are, you know, under construction. So there are success stories, you know, in that, but every one of the projects that I had mentioned require leveraging models. And if there were more money to do some soft or some secondary financing, we would wind up with more units, but there's just, there's no money there. There's, you know, ArtSpace came in town, and ArtSpace has been, you know, they're a national developer, and they put together a project in Memphis. But ArtSpace has a following of contributors to their projects, and it took, I mean, it's extraordinary the amount of money they had to bring to the table in order to make it work. And even then, they were able to successful with THGA and not only getting tax credits, tax exempt bonds, housing trust fund dollars, and a pilot with the city of Memphis in that case, and then significant out-of-state contributions to make it work. So we just don't have those resources readily available here in Nashville, at least not yet. And I think we're probably better off opening up the floor to questions that Eddie, Tom, or I could try to field.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that, and of course, everyone feel free to use the raise hand function. I've got one though, Duane, just kind of picking up where John left off, and I heard you mention it, but I think there's two considerations here. One is the availability of resources, and I think we've hit that one with the hammer a couple times, right? That we don't have enough. But do you also feel, just from your experience in other municipalities, that we have an environment that welcomes and ushers developers to the table? I know you mentioned a couple of different examples of where developers were offered, and we have mentioned some success that Elmington's had here. But do you feel like just the environment of Nashville, in terms of how we're I guess honestly pursuing development of those types of units, do you feel that the environment here compares to those in other areas, and does it compare well, or does it seem a little bit below or substandard?
Well, I think Tennessee has been very welcoming of out-of-state developers coming in and taking the resources away from some of our existing local developers. And I think you can find, I actually had a client say that to me this morning, I think you could find that same sort of dynamic in other cities. So local developers here can go to other cities and take advantage of programs. In fact, the story I shared this morning was we have a pilot program in Nashville because of an out-of-state developer. I started representing MDHA in January of 2008, and I told them at that time, we need a pilot program. You need to get the state law changed in order for Nashville to have a pilot program because the property taxes are so bad. And there wasn't a political will to get it done. And then LDG out of Louisville, Kentucky came to town, and they wanted to do the paddock at Grandview, and I walked into the conference room and said, it doesn't work. I mean, I know you want to build 240 units, but it doesn't work, and I don't have to look at your numbers. I can just tell you that you haven't sized correctly the extraordinary property taxes that we have. And so they went back and they looked at it, and they went, you're right. You're not going to get anything on scale working in Nashville unless you do something about those property taxes. And they went back to the city of Nashville, and I recall meetings with Matt Wiltshire, who, listened and said, okay, I hear you. We have to do something about it. And they, over the course of 18 months, got a pilot program. And Paddock at Grandview, I believe, was the first new construction pilot program, and it's a success story. But it would not have happened but for an out-of-state developer coming in here and getting the attention that the locals had said this has been a problem all along. So is there a will? I think so. I also think there's probably some things that can be done locally. I mean, THGA controls a lot of these resources. If you do a tax exempt low-income housing tax credit project of any size that makes it feasible, you're paying extraordinary fees to them now. I mean, if you do a project that has 200 units, you could be writing a check for $700,000 or $800,000 just to get the use of those resources, and that's that's a lot of money. The pilot program could be expanded a little bit here. I think MDHA has done a fine job, but it's only for 10 years. And a lot of these programs have affordability periods that go well beyond that. You had to take a view of how that can be addressed of long term, and figure out a way that it works for the city. There's got to be somebody that can come up with a number that works, but but they will also help expand the number of affordable units. And if you can do that, maybe there's a way to expand the income tiers. I mean, that again, to try to address the missing middle that Tom mentioned.
Tom, I saw you put your hand up. I'd like for you to have a chance to respond to that question. And then Kay, I saw your hand as well. So I'm noting you're next, Kay. You're muted, Tom, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I'd second everything Duane said, and then I'd maybe add a couple of other things. Locally, it's still really hard to get through the zoning and permitting process in a timely fashion, and time is money and adds cost and risk to transactions. So one of the things that we see other jurisdictions doing is adopting expedited zoning and permitting processes to reduce those costs, and even eliminating single family zoning. That's the big thing, so that any place within some region could get some density, because ultimately I think you have, as much as anything, just a supply problem in Nashville. I've driven all over the city, and it's there's not a lot of density, but there's a lot of land. So that's a heavy lift. There'll be lots of local opposition to it, but that's a way that you can be really impactful. It'll certainly make it easier for developers, local or otherwise, to bring more diverse types of affordability to the city.
Can I make one quick comment?
Yes,
In
sir.
the last 5 years, we've had a lot of people, for-profit guys, talk to the city hall. I mean, you hear about it, it leaks out of me in different ways. What happens is that they hook up with the wrong people at City Hall who have not quite embraced how this industry works. They just continue to look at subsidy and affordability as some magic trick instead of something that's actually conquerable, attainable. So I really think it's really critical that the city has some kind of intake form or platform so that developers can go there with their ideas, and the people that they're talking to have enough knowledge and information about the local nonprofit developers, about the people like Duane who put deals together, the banks, so that they can give them a good lead to how to get their ideas launched. I think most things get lost in the communication when they first come into town or first go into the field.
That's a really good point. Really good point, Eddie. Kay, I see your hand. John, I don't know if your hand is just still up from your last comment. So if so, would you put it down there? Thank you. Go ahead, Kay. Kay, you're muted. Sorry.
I unmute myself and then I get muted again. Those little gremlins. Duane and Tom, could you speak to the state tax structure? What is it about Tennessee's state tax structure that prohibits us from being able to do things like Colorado or Georgia? What is it? Thank you.
Well, I think the major issue is that you're a low tax state. So the tax credits that we syndicate for state tax liability, you don't have a lot of state taxes, so they're not a very effective tool. The CITC being the one exception, but that really gets structured almost like the new markets tax credit. It comes in as a low interest loan, and that's, I think, useful, but less useful than equity.
Yeah, you can't certificate the CITC. So it only goes to whoever, is making the loan. Somebody else can't come in and facilitate it going to somebody else.
Okay. So fundamentally, because we're, as some folks say, a very proud low tax state, it hurts us in this arena because there's not places that you can get then credits for doing activities. Is that conclusion correct?
Well, a state tax credit is spending money by a different way. You're still taking state revenues and deploying it, but it's a way that's been a lot more attractive from a appropriations perspective than just direct appropriations. So certainly the legislature or the city or the county could appropriate money and replicate what essentially a state credit does. So it's just, money's fungible, but that's been there's some compliance advantages to a state credit too. You don't get the benefit until the goods have been delivered, which with a grant you don't necessarily always have. But where there's a will, there's a way. But we've just found it's a lot easier to create efficiencies through a state credit and to create buy-in from different political constituencies through that approach.
Okay, thanks you.
Hey, and I'll add, Kay. I mean, so one thing, Texas is a state that doesn't also have a state income tax or a state credit, and they've done it through offering in perpetuity real estate tax abatements for affordable housing. So the state credit's really impactful where you have an individual state tax like in Georgia or South Carolina or Colorado, and it becomes and then a state like Tennessee, we have to do it through real estate taxes, which is similar to how Texas does it and where they've had the most success.
You're muted, Kay. But Hunter, thanks for chiming in with that. That's gives us a strong alternative option. Go ahead, Kay. I think you might have wanted to say something. I know you were muted.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is because we have a real estate transfer tax here in Tennessee, and for decades, beginning in the 70s, a percentage of the real estate transfer tax and pennies were put into actually an affordable housing trust fund administered by THDA. But what I'm hearing from Hunter is Texas may be a state that we could look to come up with a program that could work all around the real estate transfer tax.
Well, no, it's not so much the real estate transfer taxes; it is just property taxes. So, the pilot that we're talking about, and as Duane said, we have the 10-year, and for it to be expanded, Davidson County's is 10-year, but it's the lowest of every major municipality, or the shortest of every major municipality in Tennessee. I mean, Memphis is 20 years, Knoxville is 25, and Hamilton County and Chattanooga is 15. So Nashville's is even inside of the state is still the shortest tax abatement that you could receive in of all the 4 major metropolitan areas of Tennessee. So even just there to get on par with our peer cities in the state, we'll be looking to expand it.
Extend that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and on the transfer tax as a tool, Oregon recently changed their transfer tax significantly. I think there's like $60 tacked on to every real estate transfer, and that's funded a 7 or 8 figure affordable housing trust fund for the state, which funds a whole lot of different initiatives for affordable housing. So that is it's on an individual level, paying $60 more at the closing table when you're refinancing or selling your house or whatever is not a big deal, but it adds up to real money.
Thanks for that, Marshall. Thanks for being patient. I see your hand. Would you go ahead?
No problem. Hey, Tom and Duane. Recently Amazon has, made a commitment to to create what is known as an equity fund. And we have all these large financial institutions making billion-dollar commitments. Is there a role that you see where major employers or industry can play a role in helping us address some of the subsidy issues or or playing a role with states and trying to address some of these concerns around resources. I continue to say, you know, the affordable housing issue is not just a nonprofit and government issue, but it's also an industry issue. And there has to be some models or some creative way of thinking about this, that we tap into additional resources that can be able to mitigate some of the concerns that we have around affordable housing. Just wondering your thoughts on that, or any models that you have seen where they have played a role around this.
Duane, I don't know if you want to take that first, but I had a conversation with the Amazon team about 10 days ago, and I think I was really encouraged by the direction that they're going. It's a major financial commitment to support affordable housing, and they're doing things like looking at how they can support land banking and utilize excess land that they own to support affordable housing and various gap funding strategies. So there's definitely a role for that, and I think you're lucky to have an Amazon that is making that kind of commitment. And they actually have a community development organization within the corporate structure that develops community development projects, which is unique. And I think that, you know, maybe this is just my personal feeling, but they're contributing to the increase in land value and the lack of affordability in the places. You know, I live right across the border from the Amazon in Northern Virginia, and real estate prices are going up because they're going to be relocating lots of people down there. So it's, you know, important for their, you know, stewardship in the community to make some contributions. Where we see it, so Apple's made a major commitment. Netflix is doing something that they made I think a $50 million commitment to support some initiatives from enterprise. You see the insurance companies historically have done it a lot. You see groups like the Vail Ski Company that have that own real estate in ski towns all over Colorado in the West, working with affordable housing developers to create workforce housing. And they have significant needs, so it's an important thing for them to pursue. So I do think that there are models that you know, we would want to leverage. They do have resources beyond just money as well. As I said, they may own land that they can contribute. They you know, hospital systems are another potential partner where they may have surface parking lots that could be redeveloped into affordable or workforce housing to support maybe the lower income employees in their, you know, in their medical facilities. But they also can access the bond markets and raise capital through, you know, nonprofit bond issuances and the like. So I think that you kind of tapped on a cutting edge topic. Like, people are really trying to figure this out right now. And there are local models that people are trying to scale. I'd be happy to share some more of those. In fact, I'm kicking myself. We did I'll send you guys a link to this, but we did a presentation last fall where we talked about middle income housing strategies, and we highlighted a few of those on a webinar. So I'll send you guys the video. Hopefully you'll learn a few more things from that.
Yeah, that would be greatly appreciated, Tom. I see your hand, Kelsey. Would you go ahead?
In those examples of that kind of social impact investing, have you seen a difference of like who stands those funds up, that they function best? Is that something that the city does? Is it a private entity? How does that fund typically function best?
Well, so like the Apple money is being deployed by the state, and it's supporting specific California housing programs. I think that you know, I think having a group that is experienced in doing affordable housing management is the right partner for standing up those funds. So it could be the city, it could be a community land trust or a CDFI. the funder is generally not the right organization. You know, Amazon's good at getting my packages here on time, but this isn't, you know, their area of expertise. And in fact, I don't even think they want to. I think that they want to just make investments in funds for other people to deploy. So I think what you want to do is have a partner that's got capacity to, you know, administer, and you're going to attract a lot of interest in whatever program you develop. So you want to have somebody that's good at running competition and can evaluate developers' capacity, can do a good underwriting. And so who that is in the city, could be the city, it could be THDA, it could be a different partner. But those are the things that I think you'd want to be looking for, the skills you'd want to be looking for.
Thanks for that, Tom. I know we've got maybe a couple more minutes here, and I don't see any hands. Mick, would you go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to follow up on something that Duane mentioned a little bit earlier. You mentioned, I think it was in Austin, where the city is partnering with developers, where it seems like a true development partnership, where maybe there's some property tax subsidies to start off with, maybe a cut of developer fee that also goes to the developer, goes to the city. And then it sounds like also the long-term ownership goes to the city, and there are developers around that want to participate in that as well. If that's generally correct, or if it's not generally correct, correct me, but also what's stopping Nashville from doing that today? Because I want us to sort of continue to focus on, okay, what are the recommendations of this task force going to be? That sounds like it's got something that has some real potential.
I think the only thing that's stopping Nashville from replicating it is political will. I mean, you probably need to change the pilot program, and I'm not sure about the sales tax exemption because locally you only have control over about a third of it. But other than that, waiving some fees, and then seeing if developers will line up for doing the work for basically 20 years, but knowing that they don't really control the back end. There will probably be some structuring that's involved, but I don't. Again, it's as Hunter had mentioned, changing the pilot to a longer term is going to require a little bit of work. But then just saying that getting a longer term pilot comes with a trade-off, and if you can figure out a way to marry that with some soft financing, then I think you're going to find a lot of people that are eager to do it.
I'll chime in there, Mick. Like, the situation is very different in Austin than it is in Nashville. I mean, they're putting light years of additional money into those projects with sales tax abatement, property tax abatements, and in some situations with LGD, the developer that Duane mentioned that did Paddock at Grandview, the first deal to do a pilot in Nashville. They just invested $6 million in a single project that they'll own with LGD in South Austin. So the amount of dollars and the scale and what they're operating with is not even on the same playing field. We're not even on the same planet as it relates to the resources that the city of Austin has as its disposal as MDHA or Nashville has. I mean, there's 4 separate entities in the city of Austin that both control housing dollars, tax abatements, can issue your tax-exempt bonds, and have their own money to allocate or invest in the projects. So it's just a completely different dynamic than what we have here.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Hunter. And so part of me thinks that there is also a much different degree of return on investment for the city too. If they end up being the long-term owners of significant numbers of units, then that could be there is a case to be made that spending several $1 million on a single project is actually a pretty efficient use of city funds. if it leads to permanent affordability and whatnot. So I think that's something I would encourage us to explore as we go forward to sort of see what that could look like.
I'll also tell you too, Mick, like their tax abatement and what the city and the Travis County Housing Authority or Housing Finance Agency will do, they can offer tax abatements to any project that's offering at least 50% of its units at 80% AMI. So that's kind of like it's just to give you a sense of robustness.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. I know that Councilmember Allen has looked into these particular topics quite a lot. Love to. We need to continue this conversation because, as has been pointed out, we as a country and as a state, as a local, we like to fund affordable housing via tax incentives rather than with dollars. That seems to be a compromise everyone seems pretty comfortable with in a lot of ways. So I think continuing to explore that, it's a tried and true path. I think Dia mentioned trying to find those as much as possible, and we do definitely see them. Tom, I see your hands up.
Yeah, so one other strategy that we're just seeing, this is taken off in California and a little bit in Colorado now. The city is through the joint powers authorities, which are bond issuers in the state of California, and sort of equivalent over in Colorado. They are acquiring existing housing, like merchant built new apartments, and basically taking out the developer, the way a REIT would. And they're raising financing through the bond program, but not the private activity bonds. They're issuing, because they're going to own the property, they're issuing, unrestricted bonds. And the reason it works out there is, again, because of the property taxes. So it's city owned, so they're eliminating all the property taxes. And they're able to then rent those units, not at deeply affordable, but at moderate income. And there's a role for the private developer there as well. So essentially, there's a few developers that have kind of mastered this model. They go and structure the deal, work with the bond issuers and the investment bankers to get the product out there, and then they serve as property manager. And for the term of the issuance, I think it's 15 or 18 years. And then the city has a put with the developer. So if the city wants to hold on to it, then they do. And if they don't, they put it to the developer that will buy it at a predefined price, and then they can do whatever they want. So I think it's a strategy that might work if there's conventional housing that's under development right now, where the city could basically be the takeout rather than a REIT. And Mick, I don't know if you're coming to our conference tomorrow, but we're talking about that on the program tomorrow. So I can send you the recording to that too if you want.
Yeah, maybe I need to. I have got some fewer things on the calendar, but I would love to. That sounds great.
Running up against our scheduled time, and always intend to be mindful of everyone on the task force, as well as our guests and staff from our city. Kay, I saw you had a hand up. I would encourage you to type us an email and we'll run it down. If it needs to go to Tom, I hope you don't mind if we leverage access to you for, a couple more, 24, 48 hours just to run down any things that may come up from our group, and appreciate you spending the time with us this evening and offering to share some information with us. Be greatly appreciated. But with that, I do want to move for us to close. Usually Dia pops up and gives me a thumbs up, but I think we're in good shape to hop off. But thanks to everyone. But before we do go, I want to make sure that everyone recognizes that the SharePoint does have the chart that we covered earlier. And I think Dia is going to send a refresh link to make sure that works for everyone, because next week we'll go back to our task force subcommittee structure, where preservation will be meeting at noon and the creation committee will be meeting at 5 at the time we met today. So just to get everybody reoriented to how we'll continue moving forward, breaking back into our subcommittees for the next 2 weeks. John, I saw your face pop up. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything, but I think you were just trying to make sure I said those few things before we signed off. Was that right?
That's exactly right. And I was going to give you the thumbs up, but I messed it up, unlike Dia.
I appreciate that. Well, everyone have a good evening. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. This was great.